From navigating swirling blizzards to negotiating with an arrogant princeling, our characters often find themselves in challenging and even hazardous situations in which no combat takes place at all. We often find ourselves opting to use rule systems that provide little guidance on how to adjudicate such encounters, and we can, as game masters, find ourselves feeling a kind of a little bit frustrated. So stick around today as I discuss how to adjudicate non-combat encounters. Hi everyone, I'm Gary, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about one particular mechanic that is applicable to a number of games, a subsystem that I think will help you adjudicate non-combat encounters. And it's something that I use in all my games, you know, from Traveller, Call of Cthulhu, my own game, Gem, D&D 5e. This is going to work for everything. What we're going to talk about is something called an extended test, or sometimes called a skill challenge. These two terms are often interchangeable. Sometimes if this kind of system is written, if this subsystem is written into the rules you're using, it is often called one or the other. And we're just going to call them extended tests today because that's what I call them in my game, Journeyman Expert Master. And it'll just help kind of for clarity. So if I'm talking about extended tests, I'm also talking about skill challenges. They're the same thing. Now, what an extended test is a developed subsystem that can be used in any game where characters have lots of skills, as in mechanical skills. And that can be applied to kind of any situation where characters have to complete something hazardous and it is not a combat, right? So just before we do this, let's just lay out the fact that D&D doesn't really have this mechanic in it. It is often talked about. We know everyone talks about how 5e has the kind of hidden pillar of exploration, right? Because there's no rules for running exploration. There's no detailed rules for dungeon crawling like there used to be in D&D. There's no detailed rules for tracking time and things like that. And there is almost certainly nothing for no detailed mechanics. Maybe a bit of advice in the DM's game, but there's no detailed mechanics for adjudicating social encounters, exploration encounters, any encounter where combat isn't happening. Most of the rules are actually pertain to character progression and combat. And the reason for that is quite obvious, right? D&D is built off a war game, chainmail, and wargaming is still part of D&D's like ludic history. We like to kind of think that maybe it's moved past that in the last the last 50 years. It definitely hasn't. There's definitely some kind of like hangovers from its days. That shift, the elusive shift, as John Peterson would call it, from wargaming to role playing, as we understand it, and that's why different versions of D&D have mechanics for have rules for things like morale, how a heavy infantryman might deal with fighting a kind of armored cavalryman, for example, and differing scales of combat also exist in older versions of D&D. But the point I'm making is that those sorts of rules exist in the game, whereas things like how to deal with social encounters have basically just never existed. Or they do, but they're really simplified in D&D. And I think that's because the game designers are a little bit, I don't want to say cowardly, but they don't want to kind of change anything too much. I mean, they already made armor class, right, go from descending to ascending. So, we've already had one big change. So what is an extended test? Where do they come from? Well, actually, I've just said D&D doesn't have this mechanic. Actually, the skill challenge, the extended test, does appear in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. The problem is that one, it's 4e, so people don't really people have a lot of negativity towards 4e. And two, secondly, it's explained really badly in that rule book. It's like 5 or 6 pages, might even more than maybe like 10 pages explaining this mechanic, which is relatively simple. I do think though that extended tests, what you want to get out of them, are difficult to explain, at least within the framework of traditional role-playing games, like games that sit within the trad tradition, games like Call of Cthulhu, games like Traveller, games like D&D. I do think because they lean away from narrativist approaches and lean away from a mechanizing narrative, it's going to be explained badly. That's just the nature of it. And I don't actually think that it is that easy to explain what this is. I think the best way to understand what an extended test is to watch a video like this. I think this is how I can't remember which video I watched, maybe 10 years ago. I definitely remember watching a video that explained what this is, and I was like, okay, I'm going to use that. So extended tests do appear in lots of games, but what are they? Well, basically, what you do is you have a situation where there is a possible positive outcome and a possible negative outcome, and the players are going to try and do something to. They're going to be able to take several actions to try and achieve this. So, some examples where you might use an extended test would be something like maybe trying to find a particular ruin in an area of wilderness, perhaps chasing someone down. Not even necessarily a chase where it's like fraught, right? Where it's like running, but maybe a chase that happens over the course of several days. So it can be really useful for things like that. It can be useful in investigations, and it can also be useful in when the players are involved in a series of difficult, protracted negotiations. So let's talk about how you run an extended test. Well, you just got to go through a couple of steps as you set it up as your table. So firstly, you've got to decide, do you actually want to use it? Or, is the scene that you're wanting to convey, is it complex enough and or long enough to justify using an extended test? Or is just a simple skill test going to work? And then once you've decided that, it's like, okay, what is the outcome? So let's just talk about the example I just gave, which is the finding a ruin in the wilderness. The players have moved onto the hex, your hex map, where there is something that they want to find. But the hex map, the hex is a 6-mile hex, so there's quite a lot, and it's a large area. So it's going to take them several hours, maybe even several days, to search through this place to find this like little entrance to a dungeon, like a cave or something like that. And what you need to do then is you go, okay, what is the outcome here if they overall succeed at the test, and what is the outcome here if they overall fail? So if they succeed, they're going to find the entrance. Makes sense. If they fail, maybe you tell them that we're going to have a random encounter, like something bad is going to happen, creatures are going to turn up, or maybe if you have an overall failure here, you are going to get lost for D6 days in this hex, right? You're not going to make any progress whatsoever, and then we'll have to do it all over again. And then what you must do is you tell the players how many successes they need and how many failures they can have before they achieve overall success or overall failure. And what this means is basically you say, okay, you need 6 successes on skill tests or ability tests to find this cave. And you have to do this before you get 3 failures. I think a good rule of thumb is always set the number of successes about twice the number of failures. And then if they get 6 successes, it means that they find the cave. And if they get 3 failures, we're having that random encounter. And what you do then is you basically suggest the skills that they're going to use and how they would use them. And this is really helpful as a game master. And this is one of those things that you can do in your prep if you know that they're going to have to do this. So you go, okay, well, you're going to use, I think the sensible skills to use in here are survival, because then you can use that to kind of search out animal trails. You can maybe have a perception, to look for tracks or whatever, or listen for things. Maybe law or knowledge nature, like a nature test, to understand the lay of the land. Maybe you're going to make that a little bit harder. But you should suggest what kind of skills are going to be used in this test. And they will be able to suggest others, but you should definitely give them something to go off. So for obvious reasons, if you're going to do a negotiation, maybe a lord, the party have learned that this town is going to be attacked by a dragon or some other kind of terrifying monster in the imminent future, in the next couple of days, or there's an army approaching, and this lord must evacuate their people or must raise an army, must do something, needs to be convinced to do something in response to this growing catastrophe. And you would say, okay, well, here you need, you've got persuasion. That's going to be an obvious one. Maybe if your system has something like diplomacy, that's going to be a skill. Maybe if it's got deception, you could say, okay, you're actually going to lie about some of the details here. You're going to suggest that this threat is an even bigger deal than what it seems, and that if they don't go now, I don't know, like the bridges are going to be out and they're all going to be stuck here. So that would be the obvious skills in that. So that you have to suggest what the skills are going to be, and then you let them kind of also suggest as you go around. Now, once you've laid out how many successes they need and how many failures they can afford to have, you then tell them what skills it's going to be, and then you run the test, right? And the way you run the test is actually quite simple. You keep everyone in initiative order. I don't really believe in initiative rules, at least not in the kind of like the standard modern way of doing initiative. If you watch my video, I'll put a link to it in the top right now on how to speed up combat. I explain the kind of initiative that I use. But you need to keep everyone in initiative. I just go around the table. That's the order that everyone gets to act. And what happens is you keep everyone in a round, basically, like in some kind of order. And you say, as it comes to each person's turn, you say, okay, what skill would you like to test? And what does that actually look like? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to roll a perception test. It's like, okay, no, you're using perception to do what? And you ask them to explain. And then once they've explained, you set the DC. And in my system, it's kind of a modifier. So it's a set number that they always need based on their own proficiency level. And I go, okay, it's a hard test, so it's a minus 3. But if you're playing a 5e, you might say, okay, it's a relatively challenging test, but you're, like level 10 characters, you need a 17 on this, quite a high number. But if what you're suggesting or what they're suggesting is really applicable to this situation, you would lower it, right? So if they are looking for that dungeon that's had orcs coming in and out of it, and they roll a tracking or a survival test, they say, can we use this to kind of find the trail, like evidence of where these orcs are coming and going from? I go, okay, well, I'm going to give you a +3 to that because it's easy, because that's a really sensible choice here. And this is also where you give them the opportunity to suggest other things. And what that does is it places a bit of ownership on the mechanics and the running of the game on them. And it can be really satisfying as they kind of look at their sheet and they try to work out what other skills they could use. Because here's the thing, you only let them use each skill successfully one time, each skill and attribute, right? One time. So if they've already used survival to track, to find the tracks, they can't use it again. If they've already got a success out of it, they can't use it again. They have to come up with other things. And what happens is, in that example, they start to suggest things like, they say, okay, well, could I use strength perhaps to move big logs out of the way if there's anything on the trail, like clear the trail as we kind of begin to go up it? And you go, okay, well, there's not so many of these, so it's not that relevant. So it'll be quite hard, but yeah, you can try strength. And one thing that can be quite funny about this is that some of the suggestions become kind of more and more ridiculous, right? They start saying things like, can we use a religion test to pray to our gods to tell us which way it is? And you go, yeah, but there's also evil gods that don't want you to find this place. So you can roll, but you're going to need a 25. It becomes really, really silly. Or you get things like, oh, well, we've got 4 successes, we need 2 more. We're resting right now. We're just having a short rest. We're having a bite to eat before we continue searching for this dungeon entrance. Can I use sleight of hand to kind of polish my friend's boots so then he is more comfortable and ready for the next bit of the journey? Yeah, I suppose, but that's gonna be DC 30 because that's also completely ridiculous. Sometimes though, they suggest things that you're not expecting, which can be really rewarding. So just go back to that religion test, right? They might go, I assume that these orcs worship a god, and we know that this dungeon is an old castle that, like the moat house maybe in the Temple of Elemental Evil, right? It's an ancient structure. Would I know based on my own understanding of the religions and the cults in this area, because I'm a cleric, the original kind of chapel that was in this dungeon castle, was it dedicated to my god or a god that I know about? Because if it was dedicated to my god, then I would know about this. I would have read about it. So maybe I can have it on a religion test, or maybe even I could have it on a history test. So then it's okay, they're searching for somewhere, but they've just justified a really useful, a kind of really reasonable reason to be able to use history. That's what you do. Now, a couple of things that you have to appreciate as you go around is that failures have to mean something. So overall failure said that we get a random encounter, but you should make every single, if they can have 3 failures, overall failure, monsters turn up. But what does each of those 3 things mean if they fail each time? And this gives you the opportunity as the game master. It's kind of like a prompt to place an obstacle in their way. So you go, okay, well, maybe they rolled tracking, right, and they failed it. And you go, okay, well, you've turned the kind of the next bit round the kind of corner, and because of heavy rain, the trail is completely gone, and actually you've kind of walked into a boggy area. And you can go back, but you could try and press through this swamp here, but it doesn't look great. You can see the occasional adder slithering across the surface. And that can be a really good way to develop it. It also, those failures give you the opportunity to introduce more, give you the opportunity to give them more choice about what skills they would use. So yeah, they round the corner and they lose the trail of these orcs in this bog that you've just set up. and they go, okay, well, I have like knowledge like boats. And we've got a portable boat. Can we get it out and use that? Can I use that to kind of pontoon us through this boat, through this bog? You go, yeah, okay. You should also use that failure though to detriment them in some way. It shouldn't just be a development of the narrative. So you should say, okay, well, you lose the trail, it's chucking it down, you all gain 2 drained conditions, which in my game jam, drained conditions are like permanent -1s to all your rolls until you have an extended rest, until you like sleep basically. So that's a good way of doing it. Or you say, well, you could have monsters turn up then, or you could have something that like depletes their hit points, but it has to have something negative happen to them. One time I was ending a campaign and they defeated this like big bad in this, which was like this like big bad kind of like wraith-like monster in a kind of living tower that was made of like crystal black glass. And I said, okay, you've defeated it, but you need a skill challenge to get out as the whole place begins to collapse, and your this thing is going to try and like the tower itself is going to try and kill you. So to get out, you need 3 successes before 1 failure. And what we've got is, I said, on 1 failure, it's overall failure, you're trapped, your characters die. And what happens is they really kind of put everything into this. But another thing that can happen is, one time my characters were trying to escape through a portal and they were doing an extended test as part of a combat, as part of a fight, they were doing this. And I said, every failure you get, part of the roof comes down, but because you're underground and it is so heavy, someone dies, right? We'll roll to see, we'll divide the battle map up into kind of like 6 areas, and we roll to see where that lands. And if it lands on you, I'm sorry, but there's nothing you can do. Your character is dead. And that can really add the kind of tension. I always think you should kind of dial things up to 11 when you get the opportunity. A really good example of an extended test I did during the pandemic, I ran the great kind of Dragonlance campaign, right, by Tracy and Laura Hickman and various authors that contribute to that AD&D like super campaign. And there's a bit in that where the characters are in this kind of large city called Tarsis, and it is attacked by a set of dragons. And there's like mass panic, and they're trying to escape. And the idea is that the dragon armies are showing their might, so they actually want to raise this place. They're trying to destroy the city, and the characters were running. They were making constitution tests. They were like, okay, can one of us make a constitution test? Be kind of like we're like all staying together. We're not running out of breath. We're like kind of getting. Then they got to their carrot. They had like a wagon that was pulled by horses. They jump in the back of the wagon and they go, okay, can I use animal handling to calm the horses, and we'll push our way through. And the streets are full of people panicking, and buildings are burning and collapsing. And it's really epic and exciting. And then someone suggested something that is really, really, really cool. The wizard, who was a red-robed wizard, which is a kind of, in Dragonlance's setting, that is a neutral wizard in terms of alignment. He said, I was talking about how they'd had a failure, and the halfling had been knocked unconscious by a piece of falling masonry, and they were in a really bad way. And I said, there's people, like panicked people, pressing up against your wagon. They're actually stopping you from getting anywhere because you were going so slowly that the horses are kind of like being sort of pushed in on all sides by this crowd. And the wizard said, I'm going to cast Wall of Fire, and I'm going to use this to burn away these people on the side. And everyone's like, oh my God, no. I said, would that help? I said, well, I'm going to class that as 2 successes if you do that, but that is a really significant thing for your character. So you should also, when players make really good suggestions, you should be willing to kind of say, this is worth a success without having to roll, right? So that's another way of doing it. So good ideas that are significant in some way may warrant the giving of a success, despite the fact that no test has actually no dice have actually been rolled. You may also wish to give automatic successes just for certain character types. So, for example, go back to our dungeon where we're trying to find this ruined castle. You might say, okay, well, the ranger is with the party, and this is what rangers do. They track things over land, right? That's like their point, right? They're wilderness wardens. Just the fact that you brought a ranger with you, you get success automatically for that. So of the 6 successes, you actually only need 5. You can also do something similar with failures. They don't just have to be as a result of characters failing to roll the dice. It could be as a result of poor decisions, but it could also be, you could use it as a clock. So one really good example that I've used, extended tests for, where you've got a clock, is that it was something like 8 successes before 4 failures, and they were chasing this guy down, but it wasn't it wasn't like a chase like they were running. It was like we're on horses and he's got like a day's head or 10-hour head start or something. And we know he's going to this next town or these next couple of towns and we need to kind of go after him. And I said that effectively each character could make up to one successful test per day. And there was only 3 player characters, up to one successful test per day. But at the end of each day, if you haven't got to the max, the overall success, or you haven't come up with a way of getting yourself extra successes, then there's an automatic failure added to it because this guy's getting further and further away. So if you take no action, you will fail automatically. It's not that the objective won't be achieved. It will be that the fail state will be achieved if you take no action, which was a really fun way of doing it. The key thing I think that I have to emphasize about this is that it's a good way of keeping everyone involved and suggesting that, each player character can kind of do something unique. I really love this mechanic. I use it all the time. I use it every week in, week out, regardless of what system I'm using, provided that the system has enough skills, like enough non-combat skills to justify doing it. I don't necessarily think it would work with something like AD&D if you're not using like non-weapon proficiencies. You really need a variety of kind of mechanical choices for player characters. They actually have to be able to look at their character sheet and think, how would these things interact with the world? Which is not usually how the interaction with the sheet works. It is usually much more kind of gamist. And here it's much more kind of narrativist. But I do use it all the time. I'd be interested to know if you use extended tests, or as I say, skill challenges, they're sometimes called. Let me know below. Or if you're going to use them, or if you watch this and you go and use them, I'd be interested to know how you get on with it. But as ever, thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I'm Gary, and I'll speak with you again soon.